Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fantastic fourth episode of the Banana Data Podcast. I'm your co-host, Corey Straussman. I am a community manager at Data IQ. This season, we're focusing on humanizing data and AI. So, of course, it's natural that I would like to introduce our co-host, the superhuman CPM.
Oh, giving me way too much credit there, but I guess if we're Fantastic Four, we're doing a good job.
This is eventually going to become a movie podcast, folks. So if you're subscribing for the first time, just hold on. We'll eventually get there. Get through this data science stuff first, but you know why we're all here. So CPM, last week's episode with Matt was really awesome, don't you think?
Yeah. So last week we talked with Matt Doris of Wayfair about how data scientists and citizen data scientists collaborate together to deliver value to a wide, range of audience members, whether they're technical or non-technical. And today we also have another fantastic special guest host, Emma Irwin, a solutions engineer here at Data IQ, who similarly works with audiences along that wide range of data experience. So Emma, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to. Hello, everyone. Like mentioned, my name is Emma Irwin. I'm located up in Toronto, Canada. So we are officially international podcast here. And I'm a solution engineer at Data IQ. What is a solution engineer? You may have no idea. I know that when I was a little girl growing up, I definitely didn't put it beside princess or fireman, for example, but it's a really important role here because we are a software company. Obviously, we are trying to explain how great the software is to other people, specifically our prospective clients who have a range of understanding and skill sets of their own. So it's comprised of three main pillars. That would be, sales, obviously, data science here at Data IQ, and then understanding of hardware and infrastructure systems. At the end of the day, I'd say it's really about working with our potential clients to build their interest, their expertise, and some insightful projects that encourage them to purchase Data IQ and then work with us as a partner moving forward. So it's a lot of fun.
So Emma, it sounds like there's so many different things involved with this role. How do you, manage all of that?
It is definitely a balancing act. Luckily, we have an amazing team to work with, so resources I can always pull in. And it's an exciting puzzle to figure out, what is the perfect combination of individual users' needs and their businesses and goals.
Emma's kind of in a perfect situation, and feel free to acknowledge this if you want, because she gets to balance out the technical side with the storytelling side. We focused on that in an earlier episode. We're talking about how we're trying to humanize data and try to democratize it and make it more available for wider audiences. So Emma's not only focusing on being able to tell a story, she's also being able to show off the technical capabilities that data platforms and data science offers to the enterprise, but to specific individuals.
Yeah, and it's a ton of fun, honestly. I think the biggest win for me is when we go into a new customer's account and they just recognize how many skilled individuals they have in their own organization that they had no access to before. Obviously, this democratization is a bit of a buzzword, but it is really critical to bringing out the best in everyone.
We love wins here at the Banana Data Podcast. So we want our audience to win by making sure that you subscribe to the Banana Data Podcast. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's wherever you listen to podcasts. So we talked about how fun it is and how rewarding it is to be able to get those wins, make those pitches, explain, tell a story, show off the technical capabilities. But let's pivot to strategy. Let's focus on how we're able to achieve that and the strategic focus behind it.
Yeah, so I think overall, generally speaking, there's two different approaches that a company can have with their data strategy. And that is often deemed as either defensive versus offensive. And I think this can fall into a bunch of different buckets, whether it's methodology or skill set or business objectives. There's not necessarily one preferred method forward, but I think, similar to Emma's role, it's finding that balance between the two.
So in other words, when Emma is choosing a strategy, it's more or less like we're in, you know, a Raptors game or something like that, and you have to choose whether or not we want to try to be more defensive minded. We want to put up those buckets. We want to get those rebounds. We want to box out. You know, we want to do a zone.
So we went from a movie podcast to a data podcast to now a sports podcast.
You know, whatever our fans want. If they subscribe, we're gonna give them what they came here for.
Well, we love to please, that's for sure. Well, Emma, why don't you tell us a little bit about the difference between a defensive and an offensive strategy in, you know, in any one of the sort of buckets?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely depends on the company what's going to be best. I don't think I would be able to sit here and say that there's one specific way forward, but a key difference between the two is your end objective. If you're in a defensive position, likely you're going to be considering more frequently things like data security or data privacy, having regulatory compliance and governance, all critical capabilities, but not necessarily the sexy thing you normally think of when you consider what big data and AI is possible or makes possible. That's really where offensive comes in. So improving your competitive position, or, you know, the big moneymaker profitability. I think that's really where you have to make a choice, because both can be beneficial, but it depends on your end goal.
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic point. You know, like think about companies that, you know, deal with security data science. You know, one end of the spectrum, more defensive, could be preventing fraud in the first place, being able to identify like the different features that correlate with fraud and being able to identify them early and take action to prevent them. That's definitely more defensive.
Yeah.
But on the other end of the spectrum, you know, optimizing rewards programs for people who hold credit cards, different types of credit cards, that's more of an offensive strategy towards optimizing the revenue of the company or profitability or their customer satisfaction and retention. I think both of those are important for a company that is working with that type of sensitive data, people's money, so on and so forth. I definitely wouldn't claim that one is more important than the other. It sort of depends upon the business objective at the time.
And I think sometimes you'd be surprised too, when you go into a project that is meant to increase profitability, it doesn't always end up bringing in more money than you would have saved with a defensive method. So sometimes it requires a balance again. Please, no one take a shot as many times as I say balance throughout this, but it is key. So,
you know, we'll have to find a balance between different vocabulary words too. So it's a learning process here.
I'm going to balance this out by asking a question. So whether it's, you know, looking at the offensive or defensive, and like say, like, for example, with offensive, if you're like analyzing for the future, talk about the personas that you're working with or working towards, because you're not just, if you're meeting with a company, you're not like just pitching a building, you're not pitching like a boardroom, you're pitching individuals that are going to have different backgrounds, different needs, different experiences. Based off of like their technical know-how, how do you know when to focus more on the technical aspects as opposed to like the storytelling aspects of like, this is what it can produce, as opposed to this is how something functions?
Yeah, I think this is one of the key challenges in a role like mine, because there is sort of a tipping point where individuals who do day-to-day tasks care more about how we're going to enable them to do those tasks rather than the end kind of goal of all of the tasks put together. And I think that's totally natural, right? If I gave you something that made your everyday more fun, easier, or let you off a little bit earlier from work, like, yeah, you would probably care a lot more than if I said, yeah, your company is going to get X number of dollars. It just what makes most sense to us. Whereas people in higher positions will have more of a big picture type of view, or be incentivized even to get those larger initiatives pushed through. So everyone loves a good story, but some people care more about the individual words in the page, I guess.
Hey, we did before with our vocabulary choices too. So Well, I think that definitely speaks volumes, and it's sort of related to also the different types of stakeholders involved. We talked about last week subject matter experts versus data scientists, and those being two different types of stakeholders that add value to a project. Here, in this case, whether it's being a solutions engineer for a product and illustrating to data analysts how this can help them analyze the past and have more of a defensive strategy in terms of their methodology, or an offensive strategy for the data scientists who are predicting the future. There's a sort of consolidated location where they can all get that job done. Doesn't matter whether they're focusing on that defensive or offensive strategy, because they're both important to the business and eventually reporting those insights up to those stakeholders.
Well, CPM, Emma, we happen to be joined today by a data scientist and an engineer. So we've been talking about methodology, but let's talk about function. Do you guys consider yourself in your roles, in your day-to-day, and your overall roles, a generalist or a specialist? Is a data scientist more of a specialist, a generalist? Is a solution engineer more of a generalist or a specialist? Am I really just sort of confusing the two? Like, how would you guys see yourself performing in those roles?
I think that's a great question. And you know what? It honestly depends. I think data scientists could be generalists or specialists, depending on the role, because there's benefits and detractions to each, right? A data scientist who's a generalist might be able to offer a lot of value across many different realms or many different industries, but that might only go so far. So maybe they'll able to make some humanization efforts with interpreting their data, but it definitely won't be as deep as someone who has that subject matter expertise, like we talked about last week. But for someone who's a specialist, maybe you're a data scientist who works in the finance industry, and you know so much about the financial market. Maybe you studied finance in college as well. You're definitely going to be able to take it 10 steps further than a generalist. However, you might be limited towards just that industry. There's benefits and detractions to both, and it sort of just depends to me what type of data scientist you want to be.
Yeah, and I think to that point, a lot of the time it's about nurturing skills that you think will either best serve yourself or your company. I know that I came to Dataiku with a lot more infrastructure knowledge than I did data science. So in my current role, I had to lean on the data scientists for their specific knowledge, right? Their specialization. And as my skills have increased, I've been able to handle more of the generalized tasks and bring them in when we have a client who's asking for something either in a certain industry or with a certain use case that would really put their skills to the best use, which has been cool to see, because when you really let someone with the expertise loose on a project, then you get to see them really flourish.
So Emma, the next time my Spark on Kubernetes breaks, I know who to blame, right? Or to come to for help.
I like the second option.
Yeah, I mean, you guys could be talk about sort of the collaboration. It sounds like someone might have certain skill sets that complement someone else, regardless of the formal position. I mean, would you agree that it's more about background and skill set rather than, whatever your formal title was and the expectation?
I think that's a really good way to look at it. And I think it's about being cognizant of your skills as well, knowing the limitations and potentially knowing your own biases, because if you come from a certain industry and there are a set of expectations there, either about the data or about the end user of the data or the model that you build, then you might be incorrectly addressing a new area if you do choose to move. So there are going to be balancing acts.
There we go.
Regardless of the title.
Yeah, and maybe another spin on this is that when you expect someone, whether you're a data scientist, data engineer, data analyst, doesn't matter, to take on a lot of different projects or tasks that have to do with the data space, they have to be motivated to be able to gain that knowledge that they don't have, but also fine tune the skills that they currently have. And I think part of that is on the onus of like the data engineering or science team or the manager to be able to make space and identify those relevant challenges to help those individuals and teammates grow in those specialized ways. But on the flip side, it is partly on the individual to take initiative and seek to stretch themselves a little bit further. Again, as always, there's a balancing act to be had there for doing too much versus not enough. But I think that's an essential skill set that no matter who you are, in the tech industry, that's a skill set you should hone.
So it sounds like when it comes to being able to help people learn how to use a product or learn applied data science, that collaboration again is key. We don't want engineers siloed and away in their own little sphere, and we don't want data scientists acting independently or not collaborating with these other important players. It's just an important part because ultimately, to use another Hollywood reference, we don't want a Jets and a Sharks thing. This isn't West Side Story, so we don't want the engineers going up against the data scientists. We want them being able to work together to be able to find ultimately a solution, a best practice, and just generally just making people happy.
You know what? That reminds me of one of my favorite shows growing up, which was So You Think You Can Dance. And what they used to do is they used to pair together two dancers that had completely opposite styles. And that actually molded such a fantastic chemistry between these two individuals because they were able to bring something completely different to the table. And that 100% applies here. Whether it's a data scientist as a subject matter expert or a solutions engineer, it absolutely applies. No matter who you are, you have a completely different set of experiences, backgrounds, and skill sets. Whether you're a specialist or a generalist, whether you're working towards looking towards the past or analyzing the future, whether you're focusing on defensive or offensive strategy, doesn't matter. All of that applies and is important. And the only way you tap into those is by virtue of that collaborative effort.
So, in my day-to-day role here, I don't really get to deal with customers. Like, I don't ever really face customers and evals or, whatever it takes to sort of consider their business practices, whatever. I guess if by listening to me for good reason. But so I want to live vicariously through you guys, since you're dealing with potential customers, users, important power players within these organizations all the time. So based off of the methodology and function, without revealing too many details, can you guys think of an example off the top of your head where you could talk about the offensive versus the defensive, the collaboration, and kind of playing those important roles to be able to ensure that you're able to democratize AI?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I can talk about one of our existing customers who has just actually increased the number of users on the platform because they had found that they really had two different populations. And so they had a team of data scientists who were already using Dataiku for what we would consider to be offensive projects, right? They were hired for these sort of money-making and exciting future-looking work. But what they were ending up getting bogged down with was this ticket system that their analysts and otherwise were able to submit requests for assistance in. And over the course of about 6 months, they had 280 tickets for like day-to-day, what we would consider defensive tasks, but like needed to get done or these analysts couldn't move forward. And so what they decided is that it would actually be way more helpful to have everyone working together and being able to build out a full kind of data story, if you will, a whole pipeline where the defensive tasks are getting completed, the analysts are unstuck and unblocked from their own kind of subject matter expertise in that area of the data with the help of like Dataiku, obviously. And then the data scientists who were working on some of the new projects could devote more of their time to them. So it was like a little bit about upskilling. It was a little bit about, access to opportunity and to data and expertise, and then a lot about collaboration. So Corey, even though you don't see the customers, you clearly know them.
I love that story. It's like sort of alleviating some of the gap filling that the analysts may have been doing to allow them to focus more on the more important endeavors. I kind of, for some reason, I'm recalling a project that I worked on a long time ago with some architects way back at the start of my career. But I think the analogy applies here. They were mixing a lot of different types of, I guess, compounds in their concrete, to build the foundation of an actual like tower of sorts. And they didn't know which one was going to be most optimal. And here it was the blend of their subject matter expertise in architecture and my knowledge of experimental design that really helped in that collaborative effort. It was obviously something very important because you don't want to start to build a tower and then find that when it's halfway done, things are cracking at the bottom, and then things are going to fall through, and the project will fail. Clearly, I don't know anything about architecture, but I could certainly analyze the data and infer how that would scale with some predictive modeling, and also be able to inform what the type 1 errors are versus the type 2 error risk and things like that. And the architects don't know what that means necessarily, but we're able to pair that information together to ensure the success of the project ultimately.
Well, thanks for both of those examples. Now I feel sufficiently educated, like I could just go out there and start pitching this stuff. So I want to thank you both for participating. Emma, you killed it. She was a little nervous coming on today, but I think she did a great job. Everyone give her a virtual clap. Emma, since you made this podcast international, your queen would be proud. So I want to thank you for being a friend of the pod. CPM, do you want to tell us a little bit about our next podcast?
Yeah, so join us in 2 weeks where we'll be talking to Jeremy Harris of Towards Data Science and discussing the emerging challenges in AI and data science. We hope to see you there.
Thank you, everyone. And remember to subscribe to the Banana Data Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, team.